Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and happy Memorial Day. So glad that you are here with me. Recently, I saw a presidential tier list that when I first saw it, it made me cry because of how stupid it was. Apparently, these kids are being taught clearly, as this tier list that we're about to see shows, that only two events ever happened in history, and that's going to be slavery and the Holocaust. What are we doing? So we're going to look at this tier list. I'm going to give you the definitive, true, educated presidential tier list. Let's get into it. All right, so let's take a look here at this. This person said, I just did AP US History and genuinely forgot what a few of these guys even did. Well, this is very clear based off this list. Also, hold on. Who the flip is even this? Ukrainian flag in the name. Pronouns in the bio, Black Lives Matter in the bio, Palestinian... Why is there a Taiwanese flag in the bio? What the flip? Eagles fan. That's the most egregious thing right there, is the Eagles fan. All right. So let's look at their tier list here. Or her, whatever the flip, this... Whatever. You never know nowadays. The first sin... And what might be the cardinal sin is literally right here at the top. Why is Franklin D. Roosevelt listed as the greatest of all time? What? What? What?
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
Okay, and we've got Lincoln, Roosevelt, Washington, Adams, Jefferson, Madison. Okay, so first of all, egregious. Wrecked the economy for generations to come by knocking us off the gold standards and putting us on the fiat currency. I mean, of course, Nixon finished that off. We'll get to Nixon later. But started the push off of the gold standard so that our dollar wasn't backed by anything, so that he could introduce ukos of government spending in the New Deal programs that actually didn't even help to end the Great Depression. Every economist, historian will tell you that. So... Also threw a bunch of Japanese people in internment camps. Let's just forget about that part. Also, Benito Mussolini called him a fascist. We'll get to him later. Egregious person morally. Completely terrible pick for greatest of all time all around. Doubled, tripled government spending. Introduced the welfare state, which was later expanded by Lyndon B. Johnson with the Great Society. Terrible moral character. Might have even put the ships in Pearl Harbor so that they intentionally, so that he could provoke the Japanese into attack because they wanted to be in the war. That's a conspiracy theory I choose to believe. So, horrible choice here. Lincoln, okay, whatever. Roosevelt, he deserves to be there. Washington deserves to be up there. Adams, what are we even doing? Why is Adams in Hall of Famer? Adams' presidency was actually a dark stain on his legacy. He was not a good president. Adams was an incredible person and an incredible founding father, very important one, quite frankly. But he does not deserve to be up here. Jefferson, fine, I wouldn't put him up here. Madison, definitely wouldn't put him up here. Hall of Pretty Gooder, I can't see. Look, this isn't proper English, and I don't like that. See, they're clearly not learning anything in our schools, ladies and gentlemen. We can't even spell. Anyway, we can't even speak in proper English. John F. Kennedy, okay, whatever. Barack Obama, liberal bias. They only like him because he's black. They can't tell you why they actually like him. It's just because he's a black man. Lyndon Johnson, absurd. Lyndon B. Johnson, as in Vietnam War Lyndon B. Johnson. Hey, LBJ, how many boys did you kill today? That Lyndon B. Johnson? Okay. Bill Clinton, NAFTA, introduced NAFTA, which destroyed the American heartland, Ohio, Illinois, Indiana, Kentucky, West Virginia, completely, and Pennsylvania, completely wrecked American manufacturing and industry. Lots of people, thousands of people lost their jobs. It's the reason why we rely on China for so many different things. It was a terrible thing, wrecked American industry, and again, terrible moral character, and the crime bill. So anyway, Harry Truman, whatever. I would never put him this high. I don't know why. He's a decent at best president. Taft deserves to be all the way down here. Eisenhower, why are we Why are we throwing shade at Eisenhower right now, labeling him decent? He should be up here. Jimmy Carter, what the flip are you even talking about? Jimmy Carter wasn't a terrible president. He was just kind of like your friendly old grandpa. Unfortunately, I don't want my friendly old grandpa being my president and running the largest military in the world. And when the Iran hostage crisis happens, Iran takes I think it was a bunch of Iranian students that busted into the American embassy, took a bunch of Americans hostage. He immediately ruled out the use of force, which was stupid. Why would you do that? What are we even doing here? And that's why it took so long for us to get our men back. America was in absolute decline. Morale was at the floor, especially after Nixon, Ford, Watergate, and then Carter becoming in and just doing absolutely a crap job as president. Deserves to be probably down here towards all-time bust. H.W. Bush, read my lips, no new taxes, raising taxes, bad economy. He deserves to go way down here. Biden's the same issue as Carter, but again, we're showing our liberal bias here. Woodrow Wilson. Do what? Woodrow Wilson, okay, whatever. I guess because he was the first progressive president, quote unquote. But remember, Wilson also showed the first movie on the White House, that being Birth of a Nation, which was a KKK recruitment film. So, Black Lives Matter, right? John Quincy Adams deserves to be further down. James Monroe deserves to be further up. Richard Nixon gets too much hate because of Watergate, but then again, I don't like him all that much because he completed FDR's pushing the U.S. currency off the gold standard, which wrecked the economy. Literally, you're not going to be able to fix the economy until our dollar is actually backed by something tangible. Until a man can go into the bank and give the teller a dollar and say, "Give me what this is worth in gold," our economy is not going to be the same. Bush, all-time bust. Endless wars in the Middle East, straight up lying about Iraq having WMDs. Where have I heard that before? Anyway, Gerald R. Ford, he can just be in the bad level. Calvin Coolidge, why are we throwing shade at Calvin Coolidge? There will be no Calvin Coolidge hate tolerated in my country. William McKinley deserves to go up there. Ulysses S. Grant can stay there. He was an incredible general, terrible president. Sometimes these military guys end up being that way. Grover Cleveland can stay there. Franklin Pierce needs to be lower. James K. Polk, again, we're not tolerating any James K. Polk hate on this channel. Absolutely not. He needs to be up. Herbert Hoover, sure. Ronald Reagan deserves to be at decent. I don't worship Reagan like other conservatives do, but he's not an all-time bust. Trump is not an all-time bust. Jackson is certainly not an all-time bust. He should be up at Hall of Famer. I mean, we'll get into that later. Warren G. Harding, yeah, he can stay down there. Rutherford B. Hayes can certainly be down there. I don't even know what this is supposed to be. James Buchanan, Andrew Johnson, they can stay low. No offense, but who are you? What did you even do? Again, our education system is making people stupid. They don't know who any of these people are. I'm about to do my own tier list, and look at this. I put these guys all in order just by looking at their picture. I knew exactly who they were. I was homeschooled. Homeschool your children. This is Chester A. Arthur. This is Benjamin Harrison. This is Millard Fillmore. This is Zachary Taylor. This is Martin Van Buren, although a different picture of Martin Van Buren than usually shown. This is John Tyler, his accidency. See, I even know his nickname. This is William Henry Harrison, Old Tippecanoe, and this is the preacher president, James A. Garfield. Literally only known for dying. We're not going to have that on my tier list. We're going to put some respect on Tippecanoe's name, and we're going to do my tier list. See, I've set it up pretty much the same way as she, him, her, whatever has it. And see, look, guys, I'm usually very serious on my show, but see, I can have fun too. I'm just trying to have fun here because I thought this was a funny thing to do, especially Memorial Day. I'll give a Memorial Day message here in a second, but here we go. So we've got greatest of all time, Hall of Famer, Hall of Pretty Good. I could not bring myself to say pretty gooder because that's not proper English. Decent, bad, all-time bust. And because I can joke and have fun a little bit. We've got two new levels actually. What was even that? And Witta Willy Hitler, and that's in honor of our leftist nut job over here. So let's start this off here. So Washington's our first one. See, I put them all in order by their faces. Again, homeschool your children. I was homeschooled, turned out just fine. Washington immediately goes to greatest of all time. He set the standard for what a president should be, how a president should act, the decorum that he should abide by. The reason that you have such a standard for the President of the United States is because of George Washington. Washington has been knocked down people's lists a little bit because they say, oh, what was even special about George Washington when, Abraham Lincoln did this or Roosevelt did this? And I'm a fan of Roosevelt. But when you get, it's like with American culture, where they say America has no culture. It's like, no, we do have culture. You're just living in it, so you view it as the status quo. Washington is the status quo. He set the standard, and because he set the standard, you've just viewed the standard as nothing special, where it was insane what he did. The presidency is not well defined in the Constitution. It's defined to a certain extent, but not well defined. The traditions and the that which we associate with the president, by and large, comes from George Washington. He also added the phrase, "So help me God," to the end of the presidential address. They raise their right hand, they say, I do solemnly swear to, yada, yada, yada. And then at the end, he says, so help me God. So Washington added that. He was incredible. He was a fantastic leader, the father of the country, fantastic president. And I believe he delivered his State of the Union, I believe, directly to Congress, whereas Jefferson, it was like Jefferson until Woodrow Wilson, I think, where they just were writing letters to Congress as their State of the Union instead of going. Washington, I believe, went and presented the State of the Union himself, if I'm not mistaken. Also put down the famous rebellion that happened. I think it was the Whiskey Rebellion, I do believe. Because there's Shays Rebellion and Whiskey Rebellion happens around the same time period. But I believe it's the Whiskey Rebellion this time, and Washington suits up and leads an army out there, and they all chill out and go home. So Washington was incredible. He set the standard. He is the ideal president, the ideal leader, the ideal Cincinnatus type figure, the type of figure we actually need in America right now, Cincinnatus, a guy who will take power, lead his country through a difficult time, and then put power down and go home back to his farm. That is exactly who George Washington was, who Cincinnatus was. That's the type of leader we need right now, and he is without a doubt the greatest of all time. John Adams, just bad. I mean, he just wasn't all that good as president. Really wasn't fit for the office all that much. Of course, the Alien and Sedition Acts are going to make him live in infamy, which was seen as an overreach and a violation of freedom of speech, which it was, because it said if you're foreign, you cannot talk bad about the president of the United States. So, no, he just wasn't all that good. Whereas Washington wanted to be called like Mr. President and things like that, John Adams proposed being called like, Your Excellency, this and that, whatever, and he was fat, and so they jokingly called him His Rotundity. So, Jefferson, we're gonna put him Hall pretty good. He was a pretty good president. I would have major disagreements with Jefferson on the function of the federal government. He did weaken its power while then expanding its power because he purchased Louisiana, which it wasn't clear whether the government, in the Constitution, whether the government could do that or not. Of course, he opposed the ratification of the Constitution anyway because he was an anti-federalist, but he was fine. James Madison, we're going to put him in decent. No. Yeah, we're going to put him in decent. No, we're going to put some respect on James Madison's name. Madison was an interesting fellow. He was 5 foot, weighed like 100 pounds, soaking wet, was very quiet, didn't talk much, but he was an incredible thinker, an incredible philosopher. So we're going to put some respect on his name, put him up there. He did lead the country through the War of 1812, which we won. Checkmate, British. James Monroe, we're going to put him up here and pretty good. Monroe introduces the Monroe Doctrine, which is that the United States alone should have domination over our sphere of influence, which is like based, yes. So he introduces the Monroe Doctrine, and he kind of, like Washington, in a lot of ways, he kind of is like the gentle hand that leads his country through a pretty, and in Monroe's case, at least, a pretty gentle time, the era of good feelings. He was called the era of good feelings president. Kind of this nice fatherly guiding hand that led the country through. Very stable president. Adams, right down there with Daddy. John Quincy Adams was a brilliant individual, very brilliant individual. A bit of a Nepo baby in some ways, but he was brilliant in his own way, but he just was not good at the present thing. Andrew Jackson is a Hall of Famer, absolutely. It's ridiculous the hate that Andrew Jackson receives just because of the Indian Removal Act. Again, his motivations regarding the Indian Removal Act are kind of debated one way or the other. It doesn't appear that he had actual malice towards the Indians or actual racism towards the Indians, like this rabid racism. He wasn't any more racist than the people of his time. Like, it's just stupid to suggest that Jackson was this insane, radical, crazy person. He was not crazy. He was a sane leader. He was an incredible general, and he was an incredible president. He did a great job. He busted up the central bank, which was completely corrupt by that point in time. Even when, there were threats that, if he did that, they would cause a financial crisis intentionally in order to wreck him. But he was still an incredible president, and he fought for the common man. He's called the people's president for a reason. He fought the establishment. He fought against the elites. He fought for the common man, and he got things done. He set the standard for, what you're supposed to do when the state decides to just act in open rebellion the way South Carolina did during the 1830 nullification crisis, where South Carolina decided that they could just nullify federal law because reasons. They didn't like the tariff that had been imposed on farming. I think it was on farming equipment because it would disproportionately affect the South. So they decided they can nullify it. Jackson threatened to march an army in and just burn it to the ground. Ultimately, they reached an agreement, but he introduced the Force Act, which allows the president to take the army in or take the military in and squash a state that's in rebellion. And Lincoln would later use that. So Jackson was an incredible leader. He was a father figure for the nation, and he was a second George Washington in a lot of ways. He did have a bit of a temper. A bit is, dumbing it down a little bit, but he was an esteemed gentleman, and he was a great leader. Martin Van Buren, we're just going to put him in bad. Economic crisis. Listen, he was dealt a bad hand from the beginning. I was telling you about the, central bank, whatever, organizing a economic crisis. Well, an economic crisis did happen. It happened under Martin Van Buren. He did oversee the Trail of Tears. Jackson actually didn't oversee that. That was his vice president, Martin Van Buren there. Martin Van Buren was the first president born in America, but his first language was Dutch, which is quite interesting. He was Dutch Reformed, based mainline Protestant. So he was just dealt a bad hand, and then he just didn't do well. William Henry Harrison, old Tippecanoe. It's hard to put him anywhere. We're going to put him in decent simply because he died very soon after he took office. So he would have been a good president, I do believe. His accidency, John Tyler. We're going to put him in what was even that? Because what was even that? He becomes president. So after Harrison dies, there's no set no one has actually set out the line of succession by this point. And then John Tyler's no, I'm going to become president. And so he just kind of moves into the White House. He famously won't take any mail that's addressed to Vice President Tyler. He will only, take mail that's addressed to President Tyler. So he kind of forces himself in that position. Again, they call him his accidency, and he's so unpopular that he's thrown out by his own party, and they don't renominate him. So, yeah. James K. Polk, this is what I'm talking about. Put some respect on bro's name. Heck yeah, he's a Hall of Famer. James K. Polk, my North Carolina boy. Both of my North Carolina boys over here. Checkmate, South Carolina. Andrew Jackson's our boy. James K. Polk over here, he is definitely a Hall of Famer. Great president, great leader. Won us the Mexican-American War. He was a compromise candidate for the Democrats in 1840. What year would that have been? That would have been 1844. 1844, he was a compromise candidate, said he would only serve one term. incredible statesman, upstanding statesman, incredible leader, and again won us the Mexican-American War. Thank you, James K. Polk and Winfield Scott. So he was indeed a good president. So, and he was Jackson's protege in a lot of ways. So Jackson was called Old Hickory, and Polk was called Young Hickory. Unfortunately, the troubles of being president took a toll on Polk, and he died soon after he left office. Put some respect to the name of Zachary Taylor. We're going to put him at decent simply because, again, he dies very quickly after taking office. But he and William Henry Harrison both were outstanding generals. And in fact, Zachary Taylor said that he was not going to sign the Compromise of 1850, which allowed for the Fugitive Slave Act, which the Fugitive Slave Act allowed Southern slave catchers to go into the North and get capture escaped slaves. And it admitted California as a free state. But he said he would not sign that. He was not going to compromise. He became very anti-slavery. So, respect. Millard Fillmore, again, what was even that? Just a terrible presidency. Millard Fillmore, while vice president, told Zachary Taylor that if it was a 50-50 split in the United States Senate on the Compromise of 1850, that Millard Fillmore, the vice president, the president of the Senate, would vote against the president of the United States and vote for the compromise. Insane. Of course, he would just veto it, but, you know. Franklin Pierce, all-time bust. They called him Handsome Frank. He had a bright future. And then on the way to Washington, D.C., there was a train accident, and his son died, and he became depressed, not only because his son died, but because then his wife blamed him for it, said it was judgment from God for him to becoming president. Like, the woman is unreasonable. And so he began drinking heavily, sleeping through meetings. He just was not president. He was president. He just wasn't present. Allowed the Bleeding Kansas to happen. It was just a horrible, horrible time. All-time bust. James Buchanan, all-time bust. Dealt a bad hand because Millard Fillmore, with signing the Compromise of 1850, accelerated the path to Civil War, again, kicking the can down the road. Franklin Pierce's absence in the Oval Office, not being there, being drunk off his rear end the entire time, continued to allow that there was no leadership, and in a very crucial time in American history, continued to allow the embers and the fires of rebellion to continue to rise up, and this hatred for between North and South to continue to simmer. And then James Buchanan just did nothing with his time as president. Lincoln, we're gonna put him in the Hall of Pretty Good. So Abraham Lincoln, we're going to put in the Hall of Pretty Good. Like I said, he's a hard one to kind of like pin down. I mean, he was a good president. He led the country through the Civil War. Did some things that may or may not have been slightly unconstitutional, like suspending the writ of habeas corpus, but I think he did what he needed to do at the time in order to keep the Union together. And so I think he's a bit overrated because of leading the country through the Civil War, because of the emancipation of the slaves, and because ultimately he was assassinated. So, of course, he gets the halo effect, but he was still pretty solid. I just wouldn't put him up at Hall of Famer. Andrew Johnson, what even was that? Andrew Johnson shows up to his inauguration as vice president with Abraham Lincoln. Johnson shows up drunk and kind of babbles through his speech. He was very incoherent. Just was not a good president, was impeached, and was one vote away from being convicted and removed from office. Ulysses S. Grant, just bad. Again, great general, terrible president, trusted too many people, and there was so much corruption in his administration. Rutherford B. Hayes, Rutherford B. Hayes, all-time bust. He only became president because the Republicans made a deal with the Democrats that if the Republicans got the presidency, they would take troops out of the South and end Reconstruction. So, James A. Garfield, we're going to put him at decent. Again, he's the preacher president, incredible Christian man, Civil War veteran. I think he would have been good. But again, he dies. He gets shot in the back by a crazy man on a train platform. The doctors end up actually doing the most damage to James A. Garfield because they dig around in his back and cause an infection. Chester A. Arthur, what even was that? Never wanted to be president and just was not all that good at it. Didn't even get renominated. Instead, the presidency, the presidential election in 1884 was between Grover Cleveland and James G. Blaine, and nobody liked really either one. Grover Cleveland was purportedly a womanizer, and that whole election was a mudslinging contest. Grover Cleveland was allegedly a womanizer, and James G. Blaine was just a lying, sniveling snake who was corrupt as all get out. And so, they would march around, these protests against James G. Blaine. They would say, hey, James G. Blaine, continental liar from the state of Maine. But Grover Cleveland ended up winning. But at both times, he's just kind of bad at the job of being president. Benjamin Harrison, all-time bust. The grandson of William Henry Harrison, terrible. There's that famous... His presidency is summed up in the political cartoons in which Benjamin Harrison always wore that top hat, and the hat just keeps getting bigger and bigger on his head until on election day, Grover Cleveland comes back to run against Benjamin Harrison again, and Benjamin Harrison, Uncle Sam is looking into Benjamin Harrison's hat, and he says, where is he? Can't find him. McKinley comes after Cleveland. McKinley... We're gonna put him as decent. He was a pretty good president, but he was kind of a pawn of business leaders at times. So, Theodore Roosevelt, let's put some respect on the name. Hall of Famer. Similar to Jackson in a lot of ways, a bombastic, incredible speaker, incredible at getting people fired up. He was a fighter for the common man. He was just kind of an average guy, and he was very likable. People loved him. Fighter for the common man again. An incredible president. Taft... What even was that? Essentially, he was handpicked by Roosevelt to succeed him and then just undoes everything Roosevelt did in regards to going after these big businesses, not letting them take advantage of the American people, which is part of the problem we have right now. As our time period, we just have these monopolies and these huge businesses taking advantage of the American people. Roosevelt put a lot of restrictions into and sued these companies to hack in order to break up these trust busting, and all those policies to, again, Roosevelt wasn't anti-wealth, he was anti-unethical wealth, and I would say the same thing for myself. But Taft just undoes everything Roosevelt does, so Roosevelt comes back to run against him and causes them both to lose because that's how that works. And Woodrow Wilson, just bad. Vote for Wilson, who kept you out of war. Immediately gets you into war. He was itching to get into war. Very progressive president. He was all into eugenics and early proponent of a lot of these radical leftist policies. He showed the first movie in the White House, and that would be Birth of a Nation, which was a KKK recruitment film. So just progressive, liberal, not a good individual, and not a good president. Warren G. Harding, what was even that? Womanizer, slept around like a ton, and then just dies 2 years into his term. Calvin Coolidge, this is why we're putting some respect on his name. He was pretty good. He was a pretty good president. He was a solid president. Solid at what we did. Solid at what he did. So, silent cow, didn't say much. Actually, he gets to be a Hall of Famer. He balanced the budget. And, yeah, he was a pretty good president. Again, kind of that quiet, fatherly figure leading the nation through a difficult time there. And so, hey, man, we give Coolidge his due. Herbert Hoover, all-time bust. Stock market crash, need I say more. Widowy Hitler, and I'm putting him in Widowy Hitler, FDR, mainly. It's kind of ironic, but also too Mussolini. It's a joke because Mussolini read Franklin D. Roosevelt's book and said, "It's all right, guys. He's one of us. He's a fascist." So I'm pulling your leg a little bit there. That's what I'm referencing. So Roosevelt, of course, introduces all of these welfare programs that are going to be expanded by Lyndon B. Johnson in the New Deal, pushes us off the gold standard, which had a horrible effect on the economy in regards to inflation and everything. Historians and economists argue that kind of the New Deal, or the stock market crash, actually ended up kind of correcting itself, the Great Depression rather, more so than FDR's New Deal programs even did. So, and then again, of course, there's the question over whether he intentionally put our ships in Pearl Harbor to provoke the Japanese to attack or not. I choose to believe that for reasons that I may get into in a later episode. But anyway, Harry Truman, we're just going to put him in decent. He was fine, whatever. Eisenhower, put the respect on Eisenhower's name. He gets Hall of Pretty Good. Just a solid leader. Just a solid president. However, the CIA and the interstate system is his crowning achievement. However, the CIA running around and toppling despots and dictators and propping up new despots and dictators that like America this time on his watch was not great. No president has actually had control over the CIA. That's why we should just get rid of them. John F. Kennedy, we're gonna put him in decent. He didn't have a ton of time, but the Cuban Missile Crisis, of course, is his crowning achievement. Figuring that out. He pushed for the Civil Rights Act. I don't think if he lives, he gets it passed. But that's just, speculation. We don't like speculation. But he gets to go indecent. He would, of course, end up getting assassinated. McKinley got assassinated, too. Funny story about McKinley, though. McKinley chooses Roosevelt to be his vice president because the business leaders told McKinley to make Roosevelt vice president because Roosevelt was governor of New York and was going after him. And so they thought that if they made Roosevelt vice president, it would kill his political career. And then, shortly into McKinley's term, McKinley gets shot in the stomach by an anarchist in Buffalo, and now Roosevelt's president, and they were screwed. But so Kennedy goes in the decent tier. Again, he was assassinated, and so everyone puts him all the way up here. He gets the halo because he was assassinated. Johnson, do we give him Willy Hitler? Nah, we're going to give him we're going to give him all, no, we're going to give him all-time bust. And there wasn't much expectation for Johnson. But, again, Civil Rights Act, which should have been a one-page bill saying we're just not going to discriminate based on race, ends up being this multi-page bill that's now being, used to justify, trans people showing their fake boobs to children. So, terrible. And, of course, the Hart-Celler Act, which unleashed unfettered migration into the United States, which has led to Americans becoming a minority in their own country and them being replaced in the workforce and in society by a bunch of foreigners. Also, the Vietnam War. Again, hey, LBJ, how many boys did you kill today? Horrible president. He only supported the Civil Rights Act because these are his words. He said, I'll have those Negroes voting Democratic for the next 200 years. That was literally what Lyndon Johnson said. That's the only reason that he supported the Civil Rights Act. Nixon gets decent because he was a solid president, but again, he finished off FDR's plan of shoving us off the gold standard, so no. Gerald Ford, what was even that? And I'm putting him in what was even that because what was even the Ford presidency? Ford looked like a bumbling idiot during the re-election campaign, which was literally 2 seconds after he took over. And he said, what was it he said in the debate stage with Carter? There's no Soviet domination of Eastern Europe under a Ford administration. And everybody was like, what are you talking about? There already is Soviet domination over the Eastern Bloc. So there was that. Of course, he slips and he falls off the steps of Air Force One. Where have I seen that before? Just not a good president. Jimmy Carter, all-time bust. Again, tried to be everyone's favorite grandpa when we needed an actual leader like these gentlemen up here. Ronald Reagan, we're going to put him... It'd be conservative heresy for me to put him in decent. So we're going to put him in the Hall of Pretty Good. He was a solid leader. He ended up screwing the economy by increasing military spending by cutting taxes. Increased military spending rapidly while cutting taxes. Also, he slashed regulations on businesses, which led us to where we are today, which is in a very similar situation where we need a Theodore Roosevelt type figure now. Reagan was solid, but again, that legacy alone of putting us now in a new Theodore Roosevelt situation when we need someone to go out after these monopolies who are taking advantage of the American people, that is on him. That's on this guy. And so he's not the conservative savior that he's often touted as. So that's a problem. Also, he wasn't all that good on the social issues, namely marriage. In California, he introduced no-fault divorce, and I've heard people say, "Oh, well, he was going to do that anyway. That was going to happen anyway." Doesn't matter. You, as a conservative governor, president, whoever, should not be signing a no-fault divorce and gutting the meaning and the institution of marriage and making it some flippant thing to where now people get divorces because their husband, like, I don't know, he kicked me while he was sleeping, and so now I'm divorcing him. George H.W. Bush. All-time bust. Read my lips. No new taxes. Economy crashes. Oh, it's time for new taxes. Bill Clinton, just bad. Again, no. NAFTA makes you come down here to what was even that. Again, gutted American industry. Thousands of people lost their jobs. Turning Ohio, major parts of Ohio, Indiana, Illinois, Kentucky, Pennsylvania, West Virginia into absolute wastelands because manufacturing is done overseas now and cheapened everything out. Now you've got people who would be working in factories and having good wages, good jobs, good families. Supporting families are now hooked on crack cocaine and smoking weed while they waste their life away. So that's in large part to Bill Clinton. Crime bill was terrible. Also, just his moral failings. I mean, the man was a sexual beast. Like, bro was just out here just having sex with anything that moved and raping a bunch of women. So no. He gets to go all the way down here. Bush, all-time bust. Go with daddy. Where were the weapons of mass destruction, George? I'll leave it there. Also, there's strong evidence that he at least had a fairly good idea that 9/11 was going to happen. He literally got a briefing on his desk less than a month before 9/11, less than, I think, 2 weeks, actually, before 9/11, that said, Osama bin Laden is planning a big attack. And they just, I don't know what, crumpled it up and said, whatever. Now watch this drive. Yeah. Barack Obama, one of the most divisive presidents in history. Basically, again, driving racial division in the United States to levels hitherto undreamt of, and just spending his time bombing the Middle East like it was a video game. Trump, we're going to put him in decent. His first term was pretty good. Second term, Trump has just not delivered, and he's backed down on a lot of campaign promises, such as mass deportation, such as no new wars. The economy's not doing well, so he gets to go in decent. Because at least he's not Joe Biden. Because what was even that? All right, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it for this video. Sorry, I didn't realize that went for so dadgum long. I'm sorry that we're going on 40 minutes now. But thank you guys so much for watching. I appreciate it so much. Make sure to like and subscribe. And it's Memorial Day. Spend it with your family. Have fun. But also remember the American servicemen and women who have died in service for our country. They gave all, and so do not let their memory die. I will see you all on Wednesday for the next episode of the Isaiah LaFone Show. I love you all. May the peace of Christ go with you. God bless you all. Goodbye.